Pete, welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, man. I'm really excited about this conversation. Thanks for making time today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Super fun. So, we got a million things we can cover. And you and I just met, and I'm so excited as I went through all your bio and thinking, like, how do we launch into the story of Pete Hunt? Because there's a thousand cool places. What I thought would be an interesting place to begin would be to go back to your days at Instagram. If I'm not mistaken, this was like 2013, 14 kind of time frame. Is that right? When you were at Instagram?
Yeah. I think whenever the acquisition happened, which was 12 or 13, I was right there.
Okay. And so that's what really struck out or stood out to me was I think at the time maybe Instagram was just over 100 million users. Right now we're 2 billion plus. And you're there working on this platform and the technology at the beginning of what's going to be a meteoric rise in terms of its adoption. So tell us, like, what are you working on at that time? What's going on in your mind as an engineer? I just got to set the stage of Pete at Instagram. What's going on there?
Yeah, so a couple of years earlier, I had graduated from my master's program and I was trying to figure out where I was going to work. What's kind of interesting about that was I did one of these 4+1 master's programs where you go straight from undergrad, you do an extra,
Okay.
you stay for
Yeah,
an extra
totally.
year and you kind of do the master's. So I was looking for a job after undergrad and I had gone to the career fair and basically nobody was interested in talking to me. And I had just no idea what I was doing. My resume was terrible. My pitch was terrible. I literally got like first round interview at Microsoft and then rejected. And then nobody else even gave me an interview.
Wow.
And that was a little bit of a wake up call. I had a year to do my master's and really figure out like how these interviews work and how the process works. And I really leveled up and I ended up actually the second time around going 7 for 7. So like seven interviews, seven offers, and felt like Facebook was the place that I really wanted to work. And there were a couple of reasons for that. Candidly, one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't want to talk to me was I had not a horrible GPA, but I was not a 4.0 student, right? I had a lot of
Okay.
stuff going
Okay.
on. I loved computers. I did not love going to lectures or like,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
We could have a whole
But
nother episode about what's broken in the education system and how someone as successful as you can not do well in terms of GPA. But let me real quick. I want to make sure I got the timeline. So the O for however many no offers, nobody wants to talk to you was after your 4 years had finished,
that's right.
and you're at the job fair, and then you go back and do the masters, come back
Mm-hmm.
7 for 7. Was the masters part of the plan from the beginning, or it's because you couldn't land a job, you went back to do the +1?
So it was part of the plan. You can basically the way that it often works is you can get your job offer, your full-time job offer after your bachelor's, and then your new employer will let you
Got
defer
it.
for a year and you can get your master's. So really, I think the least stress version of this is like get a good job after your
Got it.
bachelor's, get
Yes.
that master's degree locked in, and then go start the job that you had kind of locked down after your bachelor's.
Okay. And so GPA not great. I mean, I want to sit here for a second because I think a lot of people who are younger in their careers or still in college who might listen to this would be curious. What changed for you from the first point, the 4 year degree finished, and nobody wants to talk to you, to 7 offers at clearly top tier companies?
Mhm.
What was the biggest thing? Because it's not just the master's degree checkbox on the resume. I know
No.
that's not it. So what else shifted for you that turned you into a top talent, top candidate a year later?
So the master's degree had literally nothing to do with it. It was the same school. Master's degrees, they're really good if you're, maybe coming from overseas or like a university that nobody's heard of and you want to have the biggest bang for your buck and like kind of level that up. But for
Yeah.
me, I don't think it
Yeah.
made any difference, like you said. So I did a couple of things. So first of all, every night I spent an hour watching. Actually, this was like the first era of lectures being on YouTube, and UC Berkeley had put their CS
Yeah.
program on YouTube. And listen, in software engineering, there are these really high stakes algorithmic interviews where you sit down in front of a whiteboard and you write code for an hour
Yeah.
and you have to get it right. And it's very objective, and that makes them very stressful and difficult. And so I just practiced that I was like, listen, I'm just gonna spend an hour every day for the next 2 semesters and really break through this. I did that. And then I had my friend had gotten a job he was an intern and then he converted to full time and he was like going to Google and he helped me out, package up my resume, understand how things work. And
Yeah.
that really, I think, put me on in the right headspace and helped me really focus on doing what it took to have the next time around with the career fair and interviews and stuff go the right way.
I love that. Such a simple but important lesson. Like it took some grinding, an hour a day for 2 semesters to master that skill set. But what a huge transformation. I really love that. So, all right, you get the 7 offers. You want to be at Facebook. Was there a particular reason that Facebook was the place you wanted to be?
There's 2 reasons. The first was I had graduated in 2011-ish. Whatever semester has been between those is when I graduated. That was right when the Social Network movie came out. And so
Okay.
Facebook was like, it was like a product I used every day. It was super cool. They were making movies about it. So it was
Yeah.
like a very
Yeah.
fashionable place to work. I wanted to work at someplace cool. The second was they didn't ask for my GPA until they had already given me the offer letter. They're like, hey, we just need you to send your transcript in to prove that you didn't lie during the application process.
Yes.
And I was in a hiring process with Google at the time. And they were like, I was getting calls from hiring managers. They were like, hey, like, why was your exact grade in this semester this? Like, what happened? They were really like
Mm,
super digging in on that. Whereas Facebook was like, hey, you crushed the interviews. Like, that's
you're
enough
ready.
for us.
Let's go.
And I just felt like it was a much more, at least a 22-year-old me at the time, I was like, wow, like Facebook seems like a place where like they're going to respect me more. It's a place that I still feel like I owe a lot to for that
Yeah.
reason.
That's an interesting cultural difference, one I've never heard before, but I'm sure across companies and industries, you're going to see a different belief system around the importance of individual grades. But yeah, I could definitely see how 22-year-old Zach would think anybody who's willing to just take what I am right now as ready and let's go is the kind of culture I'd want to be a part of rather than digging into my whole past.
Exactly. And for
Yeah.
me, the grades were basically about one bad semester. And there's stuff going on. And, I
Yeah.
felt like
Life
that was held
happens.
against me for,
Okay.
2 years later, whatever.
Okay, super cool. Okay, so here you are. You joined Facebook, and then the Instagram acquisition happens. And what
Mhm.
are you working on? Just geek out for a second. What's the tech you were building at the time? What were you learning? This is to give us a quick inside peek. Of course, whatever you're allowed to share. Nothing top secret here.
Yeah,
But
it's what, 10 over 10 years old at
yeah, I was
this
gonna say
point.
probably old news at this point, right?
Yeah, so I came out of my master's program. I really wanted to work on like complex technical problems and like distributed systems and all that stuff. And during orientation, they make you work on a bunch of different random things. And so I actually worked on this comments box that was embedded into blogs. Like if you remember 10, 15 years ago, like TechCrunch, the comments were powered by Facebook at the bottom. And I was working on
Mm,
a feature for that. And this was in my first 3 weeks at the company. I pushed a bug and it ended up sending the owners of these blogs like thousands of push notifications, right? It pissed off a lot of people. And so we figured it out pretty quick. We rolled it back within, an hour or two. But the point is like I got a write-up in TechCrunch because I screwed up the comments feature. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like I never seen anything I worked on before in like a publication I had heard of. So I ended up wanting to work on consumer products actually, because I thought that was it was very thrilling to build something that your friends and family and people actually used, as
sure.
opposed to some back-end infrastructure system. Since then I moved around a bit, but that's really what I wanted to do at the time. And so I worked on photos and videos. We were actually building an Instagram killer. It was called Facebook Camera. Nobody remembers it. It was released.
Yeah, I do remember
And
that barely.
oh, you
But
do?
now that only because you mentioned it. If you had quizzed me before you said it, I probably would not have come up with that. But I remember it now that you just mentioned camera. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where we knew Instagram was out there and they were getting a lot of traction quickly, and we were trying to build something compete with them. And I think what's really interesting about this story is that was like 2 years or something after I joined Facebook, right? And in that 2 year period, Facebook started transforming from the Rebel Alliance upstart company, even though it was probably $1 billion company at that point, like
Right.
it still felt like, you know, we were going after Google Plus, we were the underdogs. And now there's this 13-person company in San Francisco that we're trying to kill, you know, as Facebook. And so I had like in a really short period of time had like gone from cool startup
We're the
guy
killers. Yeah.
to like corporate drone.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
And
Okay. Yeah, keep going.
and so yeah, there's a little bit of whiplash when they basically gave us an 8-hour heads up that the Instagram acquisition was happening. And so they called us to the office early. They said, hey, you know, later today, we're going to announce that we acquired Instagram and you're going to meet your new coworkers. Congratulations. And these were the people that we were like viciously competing with for you know, like a year or something.
That's so
Really
interesting. And okay, so then how did the integration of the teams and the cultures go? And maybe relating that to you as a CEO and leader now, I'm curious if there were any lessons then in terms of building high performing teams or culture integration that have continued to serve you.
Tons. That just the lesson. I didn't even really realize that I was learning lessons while we were learning or while I was learning them. Right. So there was a couple of things that were going on. So first of all, we had to kind of integrate this small startup into this larger company, right? And so there's a certain balance that you have to strike where you bought the company for a reason. You want those people to be successful and to keep doing what they're doing to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to just take the Instagram team, hire them, throw out all their swag, put Facebook hoodies on and have them go work on the Facebook product. Like that, it clearly was not the right call. And I think that Zuck did a really good job of keeping that Instagram identity alive for a really long time. I mean, they retained Kevin and Mike over there for years.
Right.
You don't stick around there, especially after selling your company for $1 billion just for the money, right? Like, you know, after the first year or two, you got plenty of money. I don't know. I would talk to them, get their point of view, but it seemed to me like they were pretty happy for a long time there, and the team was pretty happy for a long time there. Really on the flip side, though, you do have to do some degree of like what they call M&A integration, where you want them to retain their identity, but not so much that they don't mix with the rest of the company. I was fairly early in my career at that point. I was the first engineer to go from Facebook over to Instagram and like kind of integrate and build. We were basically building web products. They had an iOS app. They had just launched their Android app, and we were about to build a web app. And so I was kind of the leader of that project. And so that was one of the first experiments, I think, in actually mixing team members that came from the Facebook side and were not hired into Instagram. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. So did you have, I'll say, original Instagram employees working under you on that project?
More like peers. So I had come with, I went over there first and I worked hand in hand with a designer and one or two of their generalist engineers. And we hit it off. We're still good friends to this day. And then later on, we started hiring and growing my team. There's just like a general pipeline of people that come out of Facebook recruiting.
So what was the gnarliest technical challenge in that whole phase of your career?
This was the thing I think that made my career, at least the early part of it, was we were, like I said, we were building the Instagram web app. Okay. And like you said, hit 100 million MAUs, scaling really rapidly. And the infrastructure team told me that, you know, we have to deliver this web app, but we can't burn any CPU cycles on the server, right? So there's basically, I'll spare you the deep technical details, but there's a set of databases that can only handle a certain number of connections.
Sure.
And if you increase the amount of CPU that you use, you have to spin up more servers. That creates more connections to the database, and then the databases fall over. And so what they told me was, you can't burn any more CPU cycles on the server. You can basically render your application in one of two places. You can either render it on the server and burn a bunch of CPU cycles, or you can render it on the client and basically use the processor on your phone or your laptop to do the rendering. And so we chose client rendering. Now, if there are web developers that are listening to this, they will probably start nitpicking every aspect of this decision. In the intervening years, maybe this wasn't the most rational decision in the world. But listen, I was early in my career. This is what they told me. I was still learning. So that's what we ended up doing, was doing client rendering. I had been asking around internally, like, hey, so one of the advantages, by the way, of like selling your company to Facebook is you can go take advantage of all the resources. And
Sure,
so
totally.
I was able to go to a team called UI engineering and say, hey, like, what's the best way for us to do client rendering? And so they said, we've got these three potential experimental technologies, pick one and try it. And so I picked this one called React, and we used it, and it was already working, but like had a lot of rough edges. There was actually a lot of stuff that was broken. So, we built Instagram with it. We fixed a bunch of stuff with it. And I got really excited about this technology. I was like, this was way better than anything else that we would have used that would be kind of in open source or that we could
Yeah.
buy off the shelf. And we ended up open sourcing, and it became one of the most successful open source projects of all time, which was an incredible journey for me.
So I'll just shamelessly say you've got amazing content on YouTube of you presenting at different conferences and places around React. And the mechanical engineers and maybe civil engineers listening might not know what it is, but I'm not sure there's going to be a developer on the planet who does not know what React is. Like, it is, to your point, absolutely ubiquitous in terms of its use now. So are you telling me that what is now one of the most widely adopted open source tools for this function was literally like a one of three Pete and his team evaluating some internal experimental tools, and you just happened to pick React? Like, it's that fortuitous? I mean, was there any magic behind that decision that made it a clear winner, or it could have been something else? It just happened to be React. I love these little serendipitous kind of moments, but what was that? Take us back to the decision. Why React?
Yeah, so they actually made a documentary about this. So I'll just like plug it. You can Google
Well,
React
plug the
documentary,
yeah.
and you'll find it. But it is a very serendipitous thing. And I was one of the first people working on this thing. I did not build it. Jordan Walk had built it. And there was a small team of people that had been working on it. But it had really worked only on this really small feature of the Facebook website. They rolled it out on one single tiny little thing to one small experimental group of people. It's Facebook. It's $1 zillion company. They have to move a little bit slower and take fewer risks. I was an idiot. And I was like, let's just build the whole site in this experimental technology and hope it works. And guess what? It actually did work. It took a lot of effort to do that. And I had to I'm actually not an idiot. I actually had to do a lot of challenging technical stuff to fix this and make it work. But, I really came at it from there's a certain degree of early career useful ignorance and willingness to try. But one of the reasons why I did end up getting, the job at Facebook was I was scrappy. I did work really hard. I did take a look at the problems and try to figure out what had to get solved, and was in an environment that was super supportive too. We basically gave that project the momentum it needed to kind of hit escape velocity within the organization and become what it is today. I'll take credit for that for sure.
I'll take credit for that all day long. You deserve the credit for that. So Pete, let's take this then, and I think it's a good launch point into where you went next, and the decision to walk away from the giant that is Facebook, now Meta, Instagram, everything involved there, and launch your own company. And so I'm curious for you, when did that decision come along? And it just kind of walk through that decision process, but also looking back, who and how would you say, like, are the people who this is for? Like, I get this question all the time as a coach. Like, hey, I love what I'm doing. I love technology. I really want to be a technical co-founder. I really want to own my own business. Like, that's my dream thing. I want to do that. And then the natural follow-up is like, how do I know if I'm ready, or what does it take to be successful? And so tell us about your decision path, and then reflecting back, who would you recommend, or how would you say when you're ready to do something like you did?
Yeah, so I always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I think people look back at kind of where I've worked and kind of the teams I've been a part of, and it seems like I've got a lot of good logos on there. But like, remember, I started out as somebody that kind of like barely got his first job. I still probably would never work at Google over that. Them, really dragging me through that process. I wasn't super fan of where I went to school and all that stuff. Listen, I had a chip on my shoulder for a while. I don't have it anymore, but I used to, and I think it was actually very useful at certain points in my career. I always thought that, why not me? Right. So
Mm.
I was working at Facebook. There were like, this was back, I started at Facebook like end of 2010. And this was, there was a lot of silly things that would happen from time to time. So one of my coworkers who was an engineer, he had sold his company to Facebook, and my first couple of weeks on the job, he like went out for lunch and came back with a Tesla Roadster, and I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. Where do I live right now?
Yeah.
Because I came from like a small town in the Northeast, where none of this stuff ever happened. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Wow.
and so I was like, why can't I be one of these people? And so I had done a lot of I had a good run at Facebook. That React project, it's used by like tens of millions of developers now. They like flew me all over the world to conferences and stuff. It was really, really fun and really rewarding. But I did feel like I met a lot of people that, the conference circuit was what they did, and web development was what they did, and they had their thing, and they had been doing it for 10 years, and they were traveling a lot, and they were making plenty of money. But it just felt like, if I was going to keep doing this, like this is a great gig, why would I ever leave? Oh my God, I'm going to stagnate.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that feeling make any sense?
Oh, okay. 100% makes sense, Pete. And I know for engineering leaders who listen to this conversation and clients that I've worked with, like whether you call it golden handcuffs or whatever metaphor makes sense to people, this idea of I'm in a good place on paper. What I'm doing is a dream for so many people. Maybe it was a dream for me too at one time. But the idea of this being all that I then ever do is one of the scariest like feelings you can have. It's completely
Yeah.
demotivating and disengaging, and it's like, oh crap, so, but it's like the fear of walking away from it is also high. The fear of being stuck in it for the rest of your career is high, and you just sort of find yourself right where you described. 100% get it. So
Yeah.
so you're in that place, and this why not me question is kind of lingering in the back of your mind. When did the idea and the decision then to leave spark for you?
So this is, I would say, maybe 6 months before I left. Part of the project that we did at Instagram was to plug Instagram into Facebook's trust and safety systems. So this is a thing that finds fake accounts, identifies, there are people that like want to see pornography on Instagram, and there are people that don't. And like, it's the thing that decides who, that labels it correctly. Make sure that any kind of harassment is as contained as possible, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. Really
And
important
so,
function, by the way.
yeah. And so when we acquired them, like we scrambled. The first thing we did was we like plugged them into this system. Remember how I said Zuck left them alone? We did not leave them alone in this department. Like
Okay.
that
Yeah.
was like the first thing is like, we said, listen, you got to use our systems for trust and safety. And like they wanted it too. Like that was one of the problems that they struggled with as a brand early on. And then after that, we kind of left them alone to evolve the product separately. And so I was like, wow, they had to sell their company in order to get access to this type of technology. We should probably go build this for everyone else. And then the guy who was dating my downstairs neighbor at the time worked in anti-spam at Google, and he came to our Halloween party, and we started talking, and I was like, oh, you'd be a pretty good co-founder for this business. And we ended up, along with him and one of my other coworkers at Instagram, who he worked there. He worked at Facebook for a year, and he was like, this company's way too big. I got to go back into startups. We all kind of got the band together and started a company that was called Smite. And we basically took, Facebook's trust and safety technology stack and like built a version for everyone else. And so that ended up going for about 3.5 years before we sold it to Twitter.
So cool. What I love about this is I think sometimes from the outside looking in, when you're an engineer, you're a developer, maybe you work in automotive or something, you look at this startup world and it seems pretty, sexy and really well put together at times. And then there's other times it's like a complete, just random, like surface interactions and chaos you could never predict. And this idea of we're at a Halloween party, just meet a random guy, just so happens to work in a space that's exactly complementary and aligned with what I want to do. And we started a company. It's like those stories are awesome because in some ways it's like the best laid plans come together with also the things you could never plan, and that's part
Right.
of the magic of it.
I think it's not like it was easy though. I think a lot of people in startups generally are like, "Oh, I'm so great, like it all just happened." No, like
No,
I had this idea, and a lot of people, I talked to a lot of people. It's like, "Hey, do you want to leave your high-paying job and like come work on our crappy company?" And everyone said no. I had talked to like a dozen people, and then
yeah,
I eventually kind of started not giving up, but just kind of not trying to force it. And that's when I met Julian, and started we had hit it off, and it seemed like that was gonna work out. I will say, one thing that I have found useful on a number of dimensions. So back then, when I was trying to start a company, and then I was trying to get in really good shape, a couple of years ago. And one thing that I would do is I would just listen to podcasts or YouTube videos of just people talking about it.
yeah,
Not I would only even be half listening, but there's a certain amount of osmosis that happens. It gets you into the right mind frame to be open to
totally.
these opportunities where it's like, hey, this guy that I met who like works on spam at Google, like there's one version of that where you say, oh, well, nice to meet you. I'll see you around. And there's another version where you follow up and you say, hey, like, would you be interested in starting a company? And I think that getting in the right mindset to be open to those types of events is really important.
Mm, I agree with that. And I love the idea of just conditioning and priming the mind well in advance of the moment when you need to be in that right mindset. That's something we coach a lot for engineering leaders is like, why is mindset so important? And it's because that moment of opportunity will come. And one mindset, you walk away from that interaction, you never say hi again. And a separate mindset says, there's something there. I'm going to go pull the thread. I wonder if I'm going to ask the dumb question or the courageous question or whatever and take it further. So if someone is in a place in their own career, Pete, where they've wanted this, I'd love to hear your perspective on why someone should consider leaving their job and going into startup world, being a co-founder or joining a very early stage startup. And specifically around is the money a good enough reason? Because I think sometimes people get caught up in like, I want to go to lunch and come back with a Tesla. And so
Mhm.
the only way to do that is to be in a startup that becomes a unicorn and gets purchased and I get a huge payout. So I want to do it. Oh, and by the way, I love technology and I have a few cool ideas. So why not be a founder?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about that? What are the reasons why it would make sense for someone to actually take this risk and do it?
I think you need to hate your job to some extent, your current job. I think that is an important prerequisite. You need so listen, there's a lot of upside potential for both founders and employees and investors, right? Like otherwise nobody would do this.
Yep.
Um, there is the often quoted startup 90% of startups fail, but failure is a complicated definition. And what sample of startups are you considering? So I do think it depends a little bit on the company and a bunch of factors that we can get into. But what I do like to encourage people to do is like, you know, joining a startup should be fun. It should be rewarding, and you should be able to look back and there are considerations, right? You want to have enough money for your family. You want to not have take such a financial risk that you're really, really stressed out about money. So, if you're going to buy a house in the next year, or you absolutely need to buy a house next year, pretty good reason to not do like at least a really early stage startup, just totally leveling with people. But if you've already got the mortgage and you've got line of sight to like what your finances look like, you're not anticipating a major change, or you're earlier in your career and you don't have a lot of financial
Yeah.
responsibilities.
Can take the risk.
Yeah. So I think there's a certain baseline of that. After that, you really want to be able to look back on your startup experience and be like, I learned a lot and I had a lot of fun doing it. I think that some startups do, you do work 80-hour weeks. The company that I'm CEO at right now, which is Elemental, we make Dagster, which is an open source data engineering framework. We really try to stick to, we don't ask people to work more than 40 hours. I think people do, but really we try to be a place where, I have a 2-year-old, and a lot of people at the company have families, young families, or they have, parents they're taking care of or something. And so I don't think every startup has to be that 80-hour a week grind. And certainly, what I think does happen is there is variability where, the week before launch, yeah, it's an 80-hour a week job. Sorry. Yeah. But that's like 1 week a year or every 2 years or something like that.
There's so many things I want to explore, Pete. And
I know we can talk forever, right?
I know. And maybe there's a round 2 in our future. We can go deeper, especially with the work you're doing now at Elemental, to your point. I want to hear about that. But the thing that stands out to me in your answer that's interesting is that both sides of the coin matter. And the coin being on one side, I really don't find passion and purpose and pleasure in my current work. Like, I hate my job. I don't want to be at this big company. I want to do something different. I want to get into that because this is not working for me. And then the other side of the coin being like, and I genuinely do want to do this startup world. Like, it's going to be fun. I have a great idea. I've got the great, co-founding team. It makes sense. I've got my finances in order, et cetera. And it's interesting, this idea of running toward the prize and running away from a zombie. And, in human nature, it's pretty clear, the evidence, the data's there, that we run faster away from zombies than we do towards rewards in most cases. That said, running away from zombies, this fear-based or negative energy-based approach can also have a lot of negative consequences in our lives in so many ways. We don't want to only be driven by fear. It's good to have purpose and passion as well. I always tell my clients, don't just run away from something, run towards something. And I think both have value, to your point. And that's what I appreciate about your story. Sometimes I think coaches especially, we're guilty of saying like, don't ever talk about the fear or hating your job, like only focus on the good stuff in front of you. But I think it's good to hear that perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
I also tend to speak in hyperbole a little bit. I think you say, gotta hate your job. It gets people's attention, right? But I think that the more accurate description of a strategy that I've used to find happiness or success or whatever it is you think about, are things going well for me? Is this like, am I happy with how things are going? And if things are going well for you, you want to lower the entropy or the variability, right? You want to get things consistent. You want to grease the gears. You want consistent revenue or whatever it is. And you don't want to introduce a lot of risk. If you are not happy with how things are going, you want to increase the entropy. You want to just, even if you don't have a specific strategy, just go do something random to introduce some variability and change into the system. And so, towards the end of my career at Facebook, I was feeling a little stuck. It was a great company. I like I said, I feel like I owe them so much, and I will defend that company till I die. But I was definitely feeling stuck. I was like, I gotta do something. So maybe I'll just leave. And it wasn't quite as chaotic as that, but thinking in terms of, do I want to add more entropy or take more entropy out of my life, I think is an important and more like neutral way to look at it than
I love that. The engineer in me, I'm celebrating that model. That's a really good way to. The way I've typically described that is like an optics kind of metaphor. I talk about widen the aperture. When you don't feel the sense of happiness or satisfaction and you don't know what you want to do with your life, then we need to go get experiences, go do stuff. But I really like this idea of entropy and introducing variability intentionally as another way to talk about that. I think especially for geeks like me, that
Yeah.
resonates really, really deeply. Amazing. Well, Pete, we have so much more to talk about. We'll do it more next time. But really quick, I don't want to miss out on you sharing just quickly what you're doing today as CEO at Elemental and the product you're building with your team, Dagster, the huge success of your Series B funding last quarter. We talked about that before we hit record today. So just take a minute here, give us a quick snapshot where you are today and where you're going.
Yeah. So this guy that I worked in open source with at Facebook, he started this company, Elemental. He recruited me over. So now I'm CEO. And we built an open source library for data engineers called Dagster. So if you've got data engineers listening, if you've ever used Apache Airflow before, another orchestration tool, we're better, I would say. I hope we're better.
There you go.
And again, this is like going back to my roots, so to speak, with React. We're trying to build a developer tool that makes people's lives better. So basically, if you give developers better tools, they can work faster, they produce higher quality stuff, they finish their projects on time or early, and they can go home, at the end of the
Yes.
day and not stress out as much.
Yes.
It's like one of these things that's like kind of a silver bullet, I would say. Like high quality tools, it just makes everything better with no trade-offs. And so that's what we're trying to do for data engineers. And so we launched our cloud product last year, and it's huge growth over the last 12 months. We raised our Series B. We were like one of the only companies that even raised the Series B in Q2 of 2023, and so we're really happy about that. And we're just growing the go-to-market effort right now, so scaling up the sales and marketing teams.
That's awesome. I think what you just said a moment ago needs to be a t-shirt or a bumper sticker or both. High quality tools make everything better with no trade-offs. Like
That's what I believe.
that's a great statement. Yeah, I think to your point, that's one of the only areas where we could pretty confidently say, yeah, like you'll never regret building and having access to a higher quality tool. That's so even the gearheads, if we just take it in a true mechanical sense, it's still true. Like that's an awesome way.
Yeah, if you need to cut something, your knife should be sharp, right?
Exactly. It's so good. Well, Pete, where can people get connected to you, to the work that you're doing? If someone just says, well, I really want to know more about your story or the work that you're doing now with Elemental, where's the best place for people to find out more?
Yeah, so Elemental builds Dagster, and that's the open source data engineering tool that we built. And so you can go to dagster.io, and all my information is linked from there, LinkedIn, Twitter, all that stuff. So
Perfect.
dagster.io/community, all that stuff.
Cool. We'll make sure everything around you and your work, what's happening with Dagster is linked up in the show notes. And I highly encourage everybody, go check out the documentary of Pete's legacy with React. Go check out the work they're doing now at Elemental with building Dagster. It's some really cool stuff. Pete, just to wrap things up, I always tell people great coaching, the work I do now, just like great engineering, leadership, the work you do, questions lead, answers follow. And we all want better answers in our life, in our careers. So what would be the question that you would lead the happy engineer with today?
I would say that figuring out what you want can be a challenge. I accept that. But once you figure that out, one of the great parts about like being an adult is that you can ask for the answers to the test and people will give them to you. So, you figure out what you want, figure out who can give it to you, and then ask them what has to happen in order for you to get that. And if the answer is nothing, keep asking until you get a productive answer out of that person or find a different person. So I would say that's a little bit of a meta question, but I would say
Yeah.
that's how I would approach the answer to that.
It's not like school anymore. You're allowed to ask for the answers to the test.
Yeah, you're allowed to ask for more money. You're allowed to ask for that role change. You're allowed to ask for that flexibility. And if they say no, okay, they said no, but at least you asked, and at least you can look back and say, well, I wasn't too afraid to go ask for the answers to the test.
Pete, what holds people back from asking? Why do you think they're not asking for the answers?
The metaphor that I use is my dog. And so we have this little basket that sits on the floor with a bunch of her toys in there. And she really every day she wants to get her favorite toy out of that basket. But there is some invisible force field that prevents her from just sticking her snout in there and grabbing the toy that she can see and easily get. And so she stares at it for a long time, starts growling, and then yaps for me to come up and reach my hand and give it to her. And I have seen so many engineers in my career that kind of, there's like a similar behavior where that's the thing you want. It's right there. All you got to do is go grab it, but you're just kind of stuck in your own head or your own routines, and it prevents you from doing the somewhat obvious thing it takes for you to get what you want.
The invisible force fields of life
Yeah.
that block us from the things we want most. That's a perfect picture. Yeah. Okay. Don't be like Pete's dog. That's our final concluding wisdom of today's podcast. Don't bark for someone else to get for you what you could easily stick your snout in the basket and get it yourself. I think that might be the most compelling end point I've ever had on the show. So, Pete, thank you again for your time. This has been so much fun, and congratulations on all of your success, and I hope just wish you a ton of success going forward with your team at Elemental and the products you're building. And we'll see you again sometime, I hope, here on the Happy Engineer podcast. But thanks again, man.
Thanks, Zach. This was great.